Aidan Hall reporting from the Havana News on News Channel 12. Today's broadcast is on a special date. It's the 15th anniversary of the famous 26th of July movement. Before the attack on the Moncada barracks, Mr. Batista and his regime were in power and mass poverty was upon Cuba. The infamous attack on the Moncada barracks was headed by Fidel Castro. The attack lasted for several hours before many of the armed rebels were either dead or captured. Among the captured were Fidel Castro and his brother. They were later released due to broad political pressure. Fidel Castro then fled to Mexico to regroup and receive training from Alberto Bayo, who was leader of the Republican forces in the Spanish Civil War. The revolutionaries named themselves the 26th of July movement, in reference to the date of their attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953. The grandma arrived in Cuba on the 2nd of December 1956, carrying the Castro brothers and any other members of the 26th of July movement. After landing, the rebels began to make a dash for the Sierra Maestra Mountains. The Cuban army was aware of the ship's landing. Although many rebels died as a result of a bloody run with the Cuban army, Fidel Castro and many other rebels escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Many of the survivors were disbanded and spent many days wandering around the jungle looking for each other. On March 13, 1957, another group was out for Batista's blood. A group composed of almost all students stormed Batista's palace on a suicide mission, looking to eliminate him and his top aides. The attempt went disastrous, with the group's leader being shot and killed. After this attack, many of the Batista's supporters switched over to support the rebels or distanced themselves from Batista and his regime. The U.S. cut itself off from the Batista regime, and without importing supplies, the regime took a hard blow. Not only was the U.S. cutting off Batista, they also gave some supplies to Fidel and his troops. Meanwhile, up in the mountains, Fidel was staying fairly quiet. With 40,000 troops, including police, the Cuban army still had to retreat whenever there was a conflict with Fidel and his men. But Batista was tired of having to retreat and soon sent 12,000 troops, most untrained recruits, into the mountains to kill Castro. The attack was a catastrophe to Batista, when Fidel lost 3 men and Batista lost 12,000 men. However, the tide nearly turned on the 29th of July 1958, when Batista's troops almost destroyed Castro's small army of some 300 men at the Battle of Las Mercedes. Fidel was pinned and several days later asked for a ceasefire that he was granted. With negotiatings going nowhere, Fidel Castro and his men eventually slipped out of the trap and once again sought refuge in the Maestra Mountains. After they had regrouped and resupplied via smuggling planes, Fidel Castro, Raúl Castro, Juan Alameda Bosque started an attack to capture Santa Clara. They would attack on 4 fronts, 3 under Che Guevara, the guerrilla commander, and the last column with the Castro brothers. After Castro coming down from the mountains, he won several small battles that in case allowed him to have control over the Quito plains under his control. Che Guevara advanced onto the Santa Clara with only 2 of his columns still intact. Once Che Guevara reached the city, he met up with the several resistance groups not under the control of Castro. On the 31st of December 1958, the Battle of Santa Clara was fought with a quick victory by the combined forces of Che Guevara and all of the combined other resistance groups. News of the fall of the city made way to Batista, who immediately fled to the nearby Santiago de Cuba. After a march to Havana, Castro and Che Guevara met no opposition. Castro then appointed his choice of president on January 3rd. After the revolution, the United States refused to buy sugar from Cuba as Castro had taken land owned by American businessmen and nationalized it. The Soviet Union agreed to buy sugar that the United States did not. The undermining of the United States eventually led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the end, the Cuban people benefited from the revolution. Castro had promoted health care and schooling and had moved all doctors in Havana that were for the rich citizens into the countryside to help the mortality rate of 60 dead for every 1,000 born. And that is the Cuban Revolution.